the medieval church had sort of a death grip on the people, well, during the Middle Ages, and during the Renaissance and a little bit beyond, they started to feel like they'd had enough of it. They wanted a little more sovereignty over their own lives, and as they made scientific discoveries, this facilitated the shift toward what we now call humanism. And this shift is called the Enlightenment period. Those of us who have partaken of Enlightenment traditions kind of see that as a little bit of a misnomer, the so-called Enlightenment period, because it wasn't terribly enlightened in terms of ecopsychological relationship, we'll say. It began with Copernicus. A bunch of brilliant thinkers brought this about. Copernicus, who lived from 1473 to 1543, was the first to successfully propose the heliocentric model of the universe. What that means is the Earth now is seen as moving around the sun. Before and after. Before Copernicus, well, just imagine you're living your everyday life and you wake up and you see the sun over here and you watch it move like this throughout the day, and at night it goes down like that, and you see the same thing happen with the moon. Of course the sun and the moon revolve around the Earth. Of course they do. You see it with your own eyes. But after Copernicus got through, which was, by the way, met not well, the idea was that the Earth is revolving around the sun, and the reason that this was not met well is because of what it meant. It meant that we are no longer the center of the universe. I don't mean that facetiously. Remember that I've just described a very church-based worldview. The fact that we're not the center of the universe anymore means that we're also no longer the center of God's purpose. In essence, this meant the beginning of God is dead, that Nietzsche promoted later. It was a deep loss of meaning across the entire culture. I mean, okay, indigenous people often refer to themselves simply as the people. We're all centers of our own little universes, and this was a huge shift. The rug was pulled out from under us. This was enormously traumatic. So folks needed some help, right? Here comes Descartes, 1596 to 1650 is when he lived. And he came along thinking that, proposed that the universe worked in a mechanistic clockwork way. The clock was new. It was a new invention. And one of the things that, I don't know if you've noticed this, it seems to me that all models of the brain, of consciousness, of us, who we are and how we work, generally is modeled on the most recent technology. So right now, computers are king, and there's all this talk about our hardware and our software. You know, the software of our brains, for example, and the hardware of our bodies. Well, in those days, the clock was it. So the universe now was seen as a clock. This made a lot of sense. Here's the picture. Here are the gears that work together. And the reason this was such an attractive model was, remember, we just lost our meaning with the loss of the Earth being the center, right? Well, so, okay, the idea now is that, okay, God is gone, right? God is just out of the picture entirely. But humans are here as God's appointed mechanics. The fundamental creator has made this amazing clock, and we're here to take care of it. We're here to wind it up and to oil it and to improve on it. Our task is to improve on nature. God's not involved anymore, and so we have to be. Somebody has to step into the void, and it's us. And the way that we would learn about it then was to break it down into parts, because if it's a machine, that's what you do, right? You take out the gears and you oil them and you figure out what's wrong and you put it back together again. Or to figure out how it works, that's exactly how you do it. How many of you have rebuilt a car in your youth, maybe? or just taken anything apart. How's that sucker work? And it works great with machines. The trouble is, of course, when you apply it to anything living, when you take it apart, oops, it dies. Interestingly enough, the machine model worked or was applied to every aspect of life except the human mind. The mind, or the person, was now split from pure rationality, yay, which was seen as good, and the emotional body, which was seen as bad. This is a holdover from that whole transcendent model that I showed you earlier, between where we're torn between the angels and the animals. They didn't get rid of that. See, there's these mental models, these largely unspoken assumptions that are underneath these things. That didn't go away. My computer's doing something. Okay. So the soul at this point was separate from the body. This is not a new idea, but it's new to combine it with the automatic machine view of the world. This combo transformed nature from a dynamic, alive, and spiritual entity to nature as an orderly set of principles, and this led to what Carolyn Merchant calls the death of nature. Death of nature. Now, I want to point out at this point, because you might be really horrified, as I was when I first encountered these ideas, that these ideas were tremendously liberating at the time. To not be dependent upon gods, placating gods, and having to bribe priests to do it, or to have priests intervene for you in a really uncertain world. They were performing, some people might see they were performing superstitious and expensive church rituals. At this point, they started being seen as superstitions rather than necessary. And this led to a tremendous freedom of mind, a creativity to study and try to control natural phenomena, an interest in natural phenomena that didn't really exist before, too. It was the beginning of emphasis of parts over wholes, and old physics is based on that. New physics, by the way, is based on whole systems theory. It's a very different ballgame, much like the old school version, indigenous version of the world, and the one that Plato held to, too. We'll have more on this later. My point here is that you can't see these things as black and white. You can't say, oh, this was a disaster that this happened, because it was an amazing, freeing thing at the time. It just had side effects, and some of these side effects are the view of the world as dead matter and inert, manipulatable from without. There's no spirit in them anymore. No spirit in anything anymore, in fact. A loss that has effects that are pretty much incalculable. And now we might say we don't feel the pain of the universe, right? Where does the me end? Well, the me ended right here at that point in that worldview. Everything that is was not alive. Everything was dead. Sir Isaac Newton, with his Principia in 1687, gave the scientific validation through mathematically verifiable predictions of the star's movement that validated this mechanical universe idea. I'm getting to my notes. So the Earth is inherently dead, and inert matter objects that move only do so because of an outside force. And we can have control over natural phenomena once we understand these principles. Then comes Bacon, that says not only can nature be controlled, she should be controlled. Francis Bacon, 1561 to 1626. I imagine he was a very unhappy fellow. These are his words, he says, nature can be studied by constraining and subduing her. To understand her secrets, to gain mastery over her. He really equated women and nature as something that really was wild and in need of subduing, if we're going to lead any kind of decent life whatsoever, and if we are going to regain our place in God's favor. High stakes. We move ahead. Actually, I should say more about Bacon. Bacon's philosophy said that knowledge comes not through the church, but from contemplation, or from contemplation of texts of divine principles, or even divine revelation. I'm adding that, but from direct observation. Here we have the scientific principles coming in. that wasn't new, but what's new is that these things are best done through controlled experiments, controlled, replicable, measurable. We can trace that back to Bacon, the getting rid of the primacy of direct experience or one-off experience, which might not be replicable in the laboratory. Oh, I'm over.